Really enjoyed this day. These have been some great, the talks have been fantastic, the conversations have been excellent and heady, and this is most definitely not that. So my name is Stevan Earl, for those of you I don't know, and I'm the information manager for a project here at ASU called CAP LTER, and I'm also the data manager for the Global Institute of Sustainability. And I'm going to talk for just a few minutes, I'll try and stay on time, about that CAP LTER project, and particularly some of the biodiversity work that we do, and actually how we manage some of those data. So for those of you who are not familiar with LTR, this is short for long-term ecological research. This is a National Science Foundation funded project. It was started back in 1980, and the idea of this program was to provide relatively stable funding for, as the name implies, long-term ecological research. So LTR is actually a network of sites. There are, at this time, 28 of these research sites, so to speak, and CAP, Central Arizona Phoenix, is one of those 28. And we've been in existence since 1997, so a pretty long time. And this is a really exciting LTR, I think, because it's one of two urban LTRs. The other one's in the Baltimore area. And it is site-based research. So each of these LTRs are focusing on the ecology of the environment where they are located. And we do not have like a very hard and fast like boundary of what the CAP LTR site is, but in this aerial image of Central Arizona, this yellow line is one of the boundaries for one of our larger research projects. So this has kind of become the de facto boundary for the project. But the point here, as I want to point out, is that it encompasses the greater Phoenix metropolitan area and extends out into the Sonoran Desert. So we're really studying the ecology of this place where we live. We just recently submitted the 4th iteration of the CAP LTR proposal for 6-year grant cycles. And this is the central question and the conceptual model from that proposal. And I won't read that text or spend a lot of time on this complicated figure, but just one thing I want to point out are these two colored boxes in the lower section of the conceptual model. On the left is the social, cultural, economic template. On the right is the biophysical template. And this is really the crux of the CAP LTR project, in that humans and the environment are inextricably linked. And so we fully embrace that is an urban ecosystem. And so we kind of recognize that there are people as part of this environment, and we include that in the research that we do. So the LTR sites, they're all kind of in these different environments throughout the world in the United States, and they're each kind of studying different things, and so they're organized in different ways, and they go about their business in different ways. But one of the things that all the LTRs do, because they're charged to do this, is to create long-term data sets about key ecological indicators that are relevant to that environment that they're in. And so we have, like CAP has 10 or 12 of these long-term monitoring programs or experiments. And so we have teams of technicians that go out just about every day and collect data on all kinds of things. And it's a project-supported activities. What I've taken here, this is just a screenshot of some of 6 of those programs that either focus on biodiversity or have a biodiversity component. And I don't have time to go into each of these, but the questions for each of these are different. And I just want to point out that we're covering a wide range of organisms in these studies. So we do a lot of like bird surveys. We do a lot of work with plants, both perennials and annuals across the valley. A lot of work with arthropods. I wish Nico was still here. And herpetofauna, and particularly like wetland plants, we do a lot of work with. Now, again, the questions behind those are all different, but a lot of them, particularly the ones that are biodiversity related, are kind of structured this way. So let me just give you an example of one. This is our arthropod work, and it's one of our longest running monitoring programs. It goes back to 1998. It's quarterly sampling, so it's an enormous amount of data. And so this is another aerial image of Central Arizona without the CAP study area in the background, but each of the green dots is a location where we sample arthropods. And the yellow squiggly line up in the top right is the McDowell Sonoran Preserve, and I'll talk about why that's important in just a second. But the point here is each of these green dots, we're sampling arthropods there throughout the valley, very kind of covering this wide, large geographic area. But critically, these points span different habitats. So we're sampling arthropods in agricultural fields, and shopping center parking lots, and out in the desert, and in people's yards. And not just yards, but like different types of yards. So like xeric yards or more mesic yards where there's a lot of turf, where there's a lot of desert. So we're trying to look at the patterns and processes of these organisms in these different habitats throughout the valley. So, and we also do start new things every now and then. We're just about to embark on doing some wildlife camera trapping work and bat bioacoustic monitoring. Those are new programs. In fact, they're so new that I couldn't get the investigators to give me a slide, but I'm excited to see that stuff added to our portfolio. And so these programs, they generate huge amounts of data, which we hope are really valuable. But another nice thing about these programs is that there are other benefits as well. And one example is our education and outreach. So CAP has a big education and outreach component. We focus on K through 12. And one of the things that the managers of that program do is they take the data, and particularly the protocols that we use in those other programs, and they translate them into science lessons that then can be integrated into the curricula of K through 12 schools across the valley, and they meet all the STEM standards and the state schools standards. So I mean, it's just a really cool thing. Another one is it can be platforms for citizen science is the common term. It really should be resident science. Is more appropriate as some of our particularly states that live on the border should be cognizant of that as a point out to me. But there are these platforms for resident science, and this is another example. So in an earlier slide, I pointed out that we do work in the McDowell-Snow Preserve, or at least pointed out the existence of that. And about 6 years ago, we partnered with the McDowell-Snow Conservancy, and you might have heard that from Garth in his previous talk because he works up there also, in this huge preserve up in Scottsdale, and work with the stewards that kind of manage this preserve, particularly the science and research components of it, to collect arthropods there. And the cool thing about this project is that the stewards, the docents of that preserve, they do all the field work. And so we bring the samples back to ASU to analyze them, but they do all the field work. So it's a great relationship to split the labor, and it works well for them, and it works well for us. Let me switch gears out of that for a little bit and talk about the data from those projects. So there's really two streams of data in CAP. One is related to these programs that I'm just talking about, these kind of organizational programs. The other is like the investigators, projects that they do, and students, the theses and the dissertations. All these data, regardless of whether they're a long-term monitoring program or a student dissertation, these data get documented and they get published and made available to the scientific community. So we document the data with rich metadata. We use a standard called the environmental metadata, ecological metadata language, sorry. Those data go into a repository hosted by the Environmental Data Initiative, and EDI short, who also supports other big NSF programs like LTER and OBFS. And then those data, those metadata at least, get harvested by Data One, which also harvests data from other organizations like Dryad and ORNL. And both of those platforms, EDI and Data One, have search and discovery services. So these data are available. You can find them. You can access them with a lowercase I or A from our earlier conversations, so at least you can get them. And these are accredited repositories, so there's a citation, a DOI to these things that are fully archived. And then one final note, switching gears away from biodiversity and kind of to the other theme of the day. Let me talk a little bit about data literacy, for lack of a better word. So I mentioned that we're archiving all these data, and a lot of these data are coming from students. And so by the nature of it, I'm usually working with students at the end of the programs when they're getting ready to graduate, and that's when we're going to make their data available to publish, obviously. And so not always, but often the case, I'm sitting down with these students as they're getting ready to graduate, and they're going over the data in their files, and I'm thinking, God, if we had talked a year ago, I could have saved you so much headache. You have done everything here really, really difficultly. And so we thought a way that we could maybe reach students earlier in their programs was to, through a course where we could offer some best practices and advice on managing the process and the workflow of a research project. And so we did, so about 2 years ago, we started this one credit course, and we're going to teach it again this coming spring on research data management, where we address kind of themes and tools like version control and scripting, databases, naming, and broad things like organization to help them just manage this whole process of generating data and acquiring data and analyzing data and keeping track of it all so it ultimately goes into the story that they tell in the forms of their presentations and articles and dissertations.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much, Stevan.